Welcome to Learning Unlocked. I am your host, Britt Bingold. As an instructional specialist in Gilbert, Arizona, I am a total nerd when it comes to classroom strategies and educational pedagogy. Educators are the key holders to unlocking learning for students. Today, as always, my goal is to provide you with resources and tools, the keys, to enable and accelerate learning for all students. Thanks for joining me today. Let's get started. Before we get going on the interview today, I just wanted to do a quick reminder that if you have time to rate us and write us a review on Apple Podcasts, we would appreciate it. The more reviews and ratings we get, the more educators will see our podcast. So if you like what you're hearing and you think others would too, please head over and provide us a review. Thanks. Hey key holders, welcome back to episode 14 of Learning Unlocked. Today we get to sit down and talk about leveraging technology in our instructional design plans with my guest, Stacey Pasquale, who I'm so excited for you guys to listen to. She's just energetic. Her love for educational technology just spews out of her, and I love that about her. She is one of our technology integration educators. So we call those ties in our district. So as we're going through the interview and you hear the word tie, I don't want you to think of bow tie. I want you to think of a technology specialist that goes and supports students and teachers in our district. She has been in education for 19 years, but has been an instructional technology coach for 11. And she just has her hands in educational technology. And she is up to date. She teaches learning and design and technology. It's a master's program at ASU, and she recently served as the president of the Arizona Technology and Education Association. And she's also reviewing the Arizona Educational Technology Standards. She's on that technical review team. So not only does she have a master's degree in educational administration and a bachelor's of arts in English and all of those great credentials, but she is just an up-to-date tech educator. And I think during these uncertain times where we're moving from face-to-face to hybrid to remote to virtual and whatever you call it, it's amazing to have somebody that specializes that on the podcast. So I hope you enjoy my interview with Stacey and you get a takeaway to use in your classroom this spring. Hey Stacey, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Brent. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It's weird working from home, and my office is my bedroom, and my bedroom is the coldest room in my house. So I have slipper socks on and a blanket and a sweatshirt, but otherwise I'm doing great.
Yeah, I can relate.
So we're recording this. I know this is for season 2, but we're recording before winter break. And so I was going to ask you, because I know you are a Bravoholic, what's the last thing that you binge watched and just loved? So I have some suggestions.
Yeah. So if anyone doesn't know, a Bravoholic is someone who watches all of the reality shows on Bravo, which I'm a huge fan of. When I watch, I actually don't watch too much TV, but when I do, I just want to not think and just kind of relax and enjoy and, eat popcorn, whatever. So I watch a lot of the Real Housewives shows, and they have a new episode or a new franchise in Salt Lake City, and that has been so much fun to watch. I've been in Salt Lake City once in my life, and it was so beautiful. So I actually just like to watch to see all the beautiful snow and the mountains, and it's really fun. And then my son and I actually last summer during the lockdown, we ended up doing a lot of Netflix binging. And yeah, he's a big Star Wars guy. And so we actually started out by watching all of the Avenger movies in order. And I want to say there's 20 some movies.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we watched them all in order. It was so much fun. And then he got me to watch the Star Wars movies in order. And I had never seen a Star Wars movie in my life. And because we watched all of that and we binged those movies, we are now watching The Mandalorian, which is kind of like a spinoff series. So
yeah.
So we've been watching a lot of that. It's been a lot of fun. I highly recommend trying to find a movie or a series that you can, go back and watch in order. Oh my God. And I'm also, by the way, because I'm a 13-year-old girl at heart, I am now binging Gossip Girl like every night.
I watched that like legit when it was out and I loved it.
I had never seen it before, and I kept hearing about people binging, on Gossip Girl, and I was like, okay, let me just see what this is about. And I'm so into it. I'm in season 4 right now. I'm loving it.
So I'm really okay. So I'm the same way. When I watch TV, which is rare with all of our busy schedules, but like at the end of the day, the kids are down. I'm like, I don't want to be mentally challenged. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Absolutely.
I am a CW person. Like I will binge any teenage pop drama. Like it's going to be bad acting, but like the storylines are actually pretty good and I'm watching The Vampire Diaries right now and I'm obsessed. So
I might have to get into that one next. I've never seen that either.
okay, so you're not the only 13-year-old. Yeah, I'm with you there. Like I just can't stop. My husband's like, you were never into the vampire thing, and I'm like, I know. Like I was so like the Twilight. Like I was like, no, I'm not into it. I'm a Harry Potter girl, but this Vampire Diaries show, I'm super into. So
All right, I'll put that on my list.
put it on your list. Yep, and then now everyone's gonna be like, oh man, these two ladies are in charge of all the education
Right?
trainings. All right. Well, Stacey, I'm so glad to have you back on for season 2, just because I feel like leveraging technology in instructional design is so important, especially right now as we are just really unsure of what's happening with the pandemic. And, I know we just went to hybrid a couple days ago and we were face to face, and who knows if we will be back in complete remote learning ever again. And I just think it's going to be like that constant, we just don't know and it's uncertain. So technology definitely has, it always has a great role in education, but I definitely think we have to really leverage it this year. And so the last 9 months have really shaped kind of this new era in education. And more teachers have redesigned their learning experiences and even their learning environments to kind of fit their needs of the students right now. So moving into this new year, when this comes out, it'll be 2021, second semester. What are your thoughts about learning design and technology?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, not to sound cliche, but it's truly been an unprecedented time in education. I feel like anytime somebody says the word unprecedented, I have to, I don't know, do something. But, the landscape of teaching and learning has really pivoted in major ways. And, we've all been forced, for lack of a better word, to use technology to deliver instruction. And we've had to redesign our learning environments, like you said. And those learning environments have been in place, if you think about it, for 100 years. This traditional face-to-face classroom environment has shifted in major ways, and I've been giving a lot of thought over the past few months to the role of technology in learning design and learning environments. And I've come to realize how learning design is so tightly bound to technology, and it's constantly evolving. The evolution over time has been driven by a bunch of different factors. Recently, it's obviously due to the pandemic, and it's just transformed almost all of our learning to be digitally delivered. And we're all learning designers as educators. We are all learning designers, and we have to really now more than ever critically assess the different factors in order to create those learning environments differently than we did in our traditional classroom. So we have to think about when and where our students are learning. We have to think about the broad as well as the individual needs. We have to think about appropriate technologies and formats and what we have access to. So I think that when we think about the growing role of these various technologies that we've used within our learning environments, the bottom line is we really just have to ask ourselves, have the incorporation of these technologies truly led to more meaningful learning experiences for our students? Because that's the goal, right? We want to leverage technology to make our learning environments more accessible, more personalized, more efficient and effective. We want to be able to use data analytics to drive our instruction. We also want to create learning environments that are collaborative and more accessible through universal design. So I actually think that one of the best things that's come from this disruption to our current educational landscape is that it's forced us to recognize all of these alternative modes of teaching. Um, And just because we've always done things, one way, that traditional face-to-face classroom, desks in a row kind of a way, that doesn't mean that it's the best way or that it's the way that should be more appropriate or will accommodate all of our students. So I actually think that this huge disruption to teaching and learning has been exciting from my point of view.
Yeah, I think from my I mean, I'm not in the classroom, so I can't speak for that. I'm sure it is, like you're just basically building the plane as you fly it type thing for our teachers right now. But as someone who does walk through classrooms and coach teachers like you do, it's kind of it's what we've been waiting for. So they've kind of shaken up learning a little bit, and shaking up, like you said, that meaningful learning experience for students. It's really had to make us think, okay, what am I designing here? Like, we all know universal backwards design. I think we were taught that in school. We kind of know that we should speed in with the end in mind. But now we're looking at a lot more factors, I think. Even in a culture, as a culture, we're like, okay, is this accessible to all kids? Like, can we make this more personalized? I love this list you have. Like, can we make this more collaborative? Can we make it more effective based on the data that we see from our kids? And then I think another thing that we're really seeing is, how do we make this more equitable? How do we, create a culturally responsive classroom as well? So I think not only are teachers shifting in those directions, I think technology is allowing them to make those shifts a little bit more like quickly, as well as the pandemic, than I think they would have without this circumstance. So even though the circumstance kind of seems like it's a bummer, in a lot of ways, obviously it's been awful with, all the COVID deaths and things like that. As far as education, it has really disrupted in a positive way how we see, okay, you know what, we've been doing this for hundreds of years. We probably need to switch this up because our kids' jobs and what their lives are going to look like after this is all over is going to be, I mean, no one could have anticipated this type of pandemic. Who knows what our kids are going to have to anticipate in the real world.
Right. And don't get me wrong, when I say that from my point of view, it's an exciting shift, that doesn't mean that it's not incredibly difficult and challenging
Right.
and just so much hard work on teachers' ends, and for everybody. And so those growing pains though, I think are all for the greater good. And I really do think that the shifts that are happening right now in our classrooms, and in how we're redesigning our learning environments, just in how we think about
Yeah.
designing learning environments, and what is it that our students really need, and how can we best accommodate them, and what technologies will lend themselves to being those great equalizers in terms of, like you were saying, access and opportunity. I think that we're going to see some pretty incredible things moving forward because we've been forced to make some of those changes right now.
The teachers that are really embracing the changes as well, and they're, even though it's tiring and they feel like they're just creating and creating and creating, I know they also have felt like, okay, I'm really starting to get good at like making a screencast of myself teaching a topic, which I would have never attempted had this not happened. Or I'm really starting to use EdPuzzle because, this is a really great source for my kids. And so I think, it's been a really tough time, but they are starting to, because they've been using it so often, the kids even, I think, are getting even more used to using those tools that they could even be using for projects or to display their learning in a more performance task way. Instead of maybe a test or a quiz, they can maybe screencast themselves and make videos of their learning, to prove what they've learned. So I think it's really, really shifted. And I think going into this second semester in spring, I hope teachers will see this as an opportunity to take what they've learned and maybe not add a bunch of new things to their toolbox technology wise, but think about design, more than just that lesson plan, that content, but looking at that skill and being like, okay, I have a bucket now of some tech stuff that I could do that might be really good for this skill, and that they wouldn't have thought of before.
Yeah, I think we're getting a lot more comfortable in terms of just being flexible, and I think
Yeah,
that's amazing. I think that's fantastic.
I know. It makes me really excited. So, okay, with that being said, I've had some teachers say to me, never, I mean, these are teachers I've taught 30, 35 years. They're like, never in my life that I think I would download a Screencastify extension and use it and teach and have it go so well for my kids. And I'm like, that's awesome. So, but let's talk. And so now they're thinking about using it in a flipped learning environment, like when they're in face to face and doing a lot of their like direct instruction lecture type things that way. And then when the kids are in class doing a lot more hands-on activities, which I was like, my head was exploding. I was excited. So let's talk about a bit about flipped learning. Okay, because I think we need to distinguish the differences. So what does flipped learning mean? And then for those students who don't have technology readily at home, especially like if we're in a hybrid model or remote situation, how can we make flipped learning work for those students and their families?
Yeah, great questions. So, flipped learning is a pedagogical model where teachers flip or reverse the role of class time teaching and homework. So, if you think about it, traditionally, teachers would introduce new content in class, right? That's your face time. And then they would have their students practice that new learning at home as homework. So, that would be independently, remotely at home. But in a flipped learning model, students would spend their time away from school learning the content independently through something like an online video lecture or maybe a reading. Maybe the teacher prepared some presentation slides, but they would be introduced to new content at home. And then when they get to class, that FaceTime is then used for what traditionally would have been assigned as homework, which is activities in which they process and assimilate the concepts that they learned through active work instead of simply just listening to the teacher lecture. So the classroom itself is redesigned in a way such that the teacher is no longer the focal point because they're no longer spending class time delivering that direct instruction, but instead they use it to guide supervised practice and provide individual assistance. So the great thing about that is when you flip the learning like that, it can really lead to deeper understanding of content, and teachers can personalize those learning environments. It's learner centric as a model. It can increase student and teacher as well as student to student interactions because you're devoting that class time to those deeper level activities and having students do activities where they're processing and assimilating. You can also promote collaboration that way. There are challenges though. I mean, just any learning model is going to have some challenges inherent. It does traditionally rely on students' access to technology at home, so that their ability to complete the work at home depends on their access to the technology and also their motivation to complete the work. Because if students come to class and they haven't done the initial onboarding of the information, it's going to be harder to get them involved in doing those higher level activities. um, but traditionally the flipped classroom relies on students access to technology, which as I just said is one of the challenges in implementing it successfully. But certainly there are ways that teachers can use this model and integrate unplugged activities both at home and in the classroom to ensure that it is accessible by all. So the model focuses on what students are doing and when they're doing it, right? So it's really focused on what are students doing in the classroom and what are they doing at home. So it doesn't have to involve technology, right? It's just thinking about how are we going to engage students in learning content and processing that content through activities.
Well,
And
and I think, oh, sorry, go, keep going. I was just thinking it's homework, right? I mean, it's still, we could still think about, hey, homework doesn't always have to involve technology. You can still flip homework to just not be practice, right?
100%. Yeah. There's a gal named Barbie Honeycutt who's a teaching and learning consultant. And I was reading an article that she wrote on how to flip your classroom without using technology. She actually created the acronym FLIP to mean focus on your learners by involving them in the process. So in her framework, she encourages teachers to move the lower level learning outcomes to the outside of class time and then involve students in achieving the higher level learning outcomes during your class time. So, for example, one of her unplugged class time activities that she recommends is kind of flipping your lesson with dice. So she says, okay, go ahead and prepare a stack of review questions prior to class, sort the questions by level of difficulty, maybe like assign them a 1 to a 6 in terms of lower to higher level. And then during class, after students have maybe read the article that you've printed out for them at home, maybe then during class, they'll get into groups, they can roll a die, and the number that they roll will correspond to the question that their group has to answer. So if they roll a 1, they get to answer a lower level question. If they roll a 6, they have to answer a more challenging, more thought provoking question. We are fortunate in our district because we're one-to-one in terms of technology. So all students do have access to a Chromebook at home. They should. And also at the beginning of the pandemic, tech services worked with the principals to ensure that all students had access to the internet from home as well. So we provided hotspots and that kind of technology to provide access. So we do have the capability to implement a traditional flipped learning model using technology to support the model, but teachers certainly do not have to. So you can
Right.
certainly do it unplugged.
And I just really liked the idea of this, mainly because I think what it does is it really not forces, I guess is not really the word I want to use, but that's just what came out of my mouth. But teachers to really look at class time as being the active learning experience based on direct instruction they've already had. And I always feel like sometimes teachers feel like, well, direct instruction is what I do and that's my job. And I'm not saying that's not your job. Yeah, some direct instruction somehow when they're at home, right? Because a lot of times what happens is we do a lot of direct instruction in class and kids get home and do the homework and they can't do it without you, right? They get lost, they get stuck. This is where we get homework tears and we don't like homework and we hate it because they're trying to practice something they're just not quite great at yet. But if we flip it and just give them some of the overview and give them some like a reading to do or some problems to try out or whatever it is, then in class, you're still directing the instruction in class. You're just doing it more as a guide on the side if you want to talk about that, and giving them more active activities to do. You had a whole list on here about having students do discussions and having them do projects and cooperative learning structures. And you're still there as the teacher. You're guiding all of those things. You're still directing all of that instruction. But I feel like that the kids already have kind of that, like you said, the onboarding of their knowledge. And so now they can really focus on um, doing a lot of hands-on with learning with it, discussing, which are all of those really high yield strategies we want kids to be doing more of. And I think teachers feel like they don't have time to get those in. But I think if we flipped it a little bit, I feel like teachers might feel, hey, I have a little bit more time during class now with my kids being able to get a little bit of the onboarding done at home to really get deeper in class.
100%. And one of the things too is when students are processing the content at home as homework, the teachers aren't there to truly see if the students are mastering the concepts or not, if it's making sense, if they're connecting the dots. What I see with my own kids often is, they'll learn something new in class. They'll come home, they'll have some kind of a homework assignment or activity to complete, and they'll turn it in. And more often than not, they get completion points for doing the homework. And I'm not saying that, that happens with all students and all teachers all the time, but I think that my children, they don't really get that personalized or individualized feedback on their homework. It's really more kind of like once they take the test, that's when we kind of see, oh, did they get it or not? Whereas if you were to flip the learning and you're actively, like you said, like a guide on the side and actively proctoring and facilitating students as they do some activities to process the material, then you can really individualize, your instruction, and you can see which students are getting it, which students aren't. You can provide interventions when necessary. All of this before you actually assess their learning. And I think that's really important. And I also think that, you know, flipped learning, I think sometimes it makes it seem as if direct instruction is something to stay away from, like it's not a good strategy. And that could not be farther from the truth.
Right. You have to
No one,
teach.
yeah, no one is saying get rid of direct instruction by any
Right.
means. And that's not what the flipped learning model is about. It's, just like you said, it's about directing the instruction maybe in a different mode, maybe using a different platform and just doing it in a little bit different of a structure so that you can truly facilitate learning with your students in class.
Yeah, because I feel like if I would have said to my students, I mean, I taught high school English, but if I would have said, tonight I really would like you guys to go on and watch this video, or listen to this podcast, or just kind of just change up a little bit what their homework was. Before we dig into the material tomorrow, I think they would have been more apt to do it than me teaching all day and say, now, okay, finish reading up these chapters because we got a quiz tomorrow. I just don't. I think it's a little bit different, and it's a mind shift for the kids too. But you're right. I think that the more you can have them actively learning in front of you, obviously it's easier to give them that instant feedback, right, which they need. And they can adjust right on the spot, and then you are formatively assessing really as you're going through those discussions, or you're listening in on kids groups or whatever they're doing, and you can kind of switch and pivot as you need to in class a little bit easier. Yeah. Okay, so now I feel like, can you differentiate the difference between flipped learning and blended learning? Because I sometimes I hear them intermixed and it starts to confuse my brain. So can you help our listeners distinguish the difference between them? And then also, can you discuss like what times you feel they should be used? Like depending on what the teacher might be teaching or doing, like what's this model for at this point? Like, because we're looking at skills and standards based stuff. When is the good time to use the tool? You know what I mean?
Yeah, when you want to think about flipped learning and blended learning, and are they interchangeable? Is there a difference? It's kind of like squares and rectangles. So not all, what is it? Not all squares are rectangles, but all rectangles are squares. Did I say that
Right.
right? I too am a former English teacher, so hopefully I
You're
got that
like,
right.
I'm going to use this analogy because I'm an English teacher, but I don't like that the analogy has squares and rectangles in it.
Exactly. Yeah. So flipped learning is a form of blended learning, but not all blended learning models involve flipped learning. So,
Okay.
as we said before, flipped learning is that model where you flip or you reverse the role of in-class instruction and homework. Whereas blended learning is really just an overall approach to learning where you are integrating both online and face to face components of learning. So often teachers would incorporate online learning resources in a brick and mortar location. So maybe teachers would use something like videos or games or podcasts or any other online learning material during class time. Whereas in flip learning, the online material doesn't necessarily or I'm sorry, and unlike flipped learning, the online material doesn't necessarily replace that face-to-face direct instruction, but it's instead used as just additional support. So there are different models of blended learning, and depending on what articles you read or what you're looking at, you'll see different blended learning models ironed out. So flip learning is one model of blended learning, but then you also have things like station rotation or lab rotation. That's a form of blended learning. So maybe, as part of your class time, you're going to have your students go around your room and visit different stations. And maybe one of those stations is them, you know, listening to a podcast, or maybe one of those stations is them watching some kind of an instructional video and doing something online. I don't know. Then we've also got like flex models of blended learning. That's often where the teacher of record is on site, but students are primarily learning online at their own pace. So maybe we would have, for example, that could look like students logging into Buzz, but they're going to school, they're in a classroom, maybe they're in a computer lab or something like that, or they're in a classroom on their Chromebook, and they log into Buzz and they are working on, the Florida virtual curriculum kind of at their own pace, but there is a teacher of record in the room. So if they have a question, they can raise their hand and the teacher of record can come over and support them and help to answer questions or provide some kind of an intervention if they need that. So there's just all sorts of different models of blended learning. But I would say that the common ground is that they all include three main components, right? There's always the learning or the content, and then there's that concept of distance or place. Like where are we? Are we in a brick and mortar classroom, or are we at home? Are we in a Starbucks cafe? Because online we can pretty much do it from anywhere. And then third, there's the use of technology. And the use of technology truly is the driving force in the learning design for any blended learning model. So I don't really think it's a matter of if teachers should implement blended learning, but I mean, especially now, it's more like how, like what model are we going to use? And when you decide on what model you're going to use, you have to identify what resources do I have? how will technology support the learning? What are my students' needs? I mean, there's so many factors to consider. And often when we work in a school district, many of those factors are, just across the board consistent. So, for example, in Gilbert, all of our students have devices. That's amazing and fantastic. We know it's consistent. They should all have access to a Chromebook. We know typically kind of what our schedule will look like. Now, granted, it's changing and students are kind of fluidly moving from perhaps they're in class, one week, but then something happens. Maybe they get sick or they're quarantined because someone that they know in their home is sick. So then they have to transition into a fully online model for the next 2 weeks. Right now, we have been we've had to shift into a hybrid model because of the metrics, that are statewide or in our community. So there are factors that are forcing us in certain ways to not be able to choose. So some things are just kind of coming onto our plate and we're having to deal with it. But right now, our teachers are having to very gracefully um, find a good balance in terms of what am I going to do with my students while I have them in class, which is only half the time now, and how am I going to leverage the technology to ensure that, the time when I'm not seeing them, that they're still getting what they need. So it's really a choice at this point. We just, I think, have to identify when it's appropriate to implement, specific models and specific resources. Again, in Gilbert, we're all still utilizing the Buzz LMS and the Florida Virtual Schools curricular resources. Hopefully, all teachers are still regularly utilizing those resources to maintain consistency for our students so that, when things happen, like right now, when we're all forced to go hybrid again, we have those resources at our disposal. Our students know to access them. When they're in class, we can do more active learning activities and processing activities and all of that. And then when they go home, maybe they have a lesson in Buzz that they're assigned. So, hey, before I see you on Thursday, everybody needs to complete, lesson 4.1 or something like that.
Right, which is kind of a flipped, right?
Exactly. And the implementation of flipped learning, like we said before, it doesn't mean that teachers are never going to lecture again or that they're not going to be providing direct instruction in class. It's
Right.
more of a focus on giving students more time in class to actively grapple with those concepts instead of just passively listening to the teacher.
Yeah. And I think it's such a shift. I mean, I love how you said the teachers have gracefully done this because I have seen on social media more teachers so frustrated and tired and upset and just like I can't. This is just like so much to handle, and I do want to take a minute to applaud them for I mean, just as our students have to fluidly go back and forth, as do the teachers. And I mean, if you've been teaching a really long time, this is like a whole new world, right? So even though at the beginning we were excited for this shift because it is giving us opportunities for new learning as professionals, it is definitely not an easy gig at the moment for sure.
Oh yeah,
Uh
make no mistake. It is hard work. And also, I
huh.
think we have to also give ourselves a break. Like we're only a few months into this. Do you know what I mean? In the grand
Right.
scheme of things and in the grand scheme and landscape of education, when we look back on this, I mean, we're literally like 6 months into this incredible shift. So we got to give ourselves a break and cut ourselves a little bit of slack. We're doing a great job, I think, and I do believe that teachers are handling this with grace and patience and exhibiting flexibility beyond anything that I've ever seen. And we're all learning new platforms and programs. Buzz and the Florida virtual curriculum was all new to us just a few months ago. And now teachers are integrating other resources like CAMI and EdPuzzle and Flipgrid and Screencastify and, all of these incredible resources that we have. And it's only been, a dot on the map so far. And so knowing how much teachers have done in just the past 6 months alone, it's incredible where we'll go from here.
I know. That's what I just can't. But I know it's hard. I look at I always comment on those posts, and I'm like, you are though doing amazing things. Are your students growing? Yes. Do they feel loved and supported? Yes. Are you giving yourself some time to, like you said, give yourself a break? And those are the things I kind of say, and then they're like, "You're right." I'm like, just maintain your focus on, you are a teacher because you love kids first is usually why we go into teaching, and so let's just keep loving on those kids, making sure that they're learning and they're moving forward, even if you feel like it's a lot slower than a normal quote unquote year. And let's just keep learning as professionals. I think you're right. It's a blip in time, and we're gonna look back on this, I think, though, in 10 years and be like, that was the moment where we made a big shift. And I hope so anyway, where it's not that traditional, you're in all the rows and we're kind of preparing you to be a factory worker. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I mean, most research will tell you that any institutional change or organizational change, it often takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years, right?
Right.
And I mean, we have done this at lightning speed. And so I think, as like you said, keeping our focus, what is important. And from my point of view, as an instructional technology coach, I just want to make sure that whatever technology we're integrating, we're doing it in a way that's adding value to student learning. So if we can maintain the integrity of that, then I think we're moving in the right direction.
Amen, sister, for sure. Yep. So blended learning sounds like a shift, obviously, that many teachers are grappling with. And some are like they're good. Like they have to just marinate in it for a little while or wrap their heads around it. But we both do believe it's an important shift towards student-centered learning. So I kind of want to ask you, how can blended learning not only provide more student-centered learning approach, but also I think it can also improve inclusion as well.
Yeah, when we use technology as a way to drive the redesign of our learning environments, like I said before, we really just want to make sure that we stay focused in ensuring that it's adding value and it's providing some kind of affordance to our teachers, to our students. Often those affordances are things that they wouldn't have in a traditional face-to-face classroom. So technology can often provide, an element of flexibility. And so when students are choosing to do online learning, often they want to do that because it's a flexible learning environment. They can learn when they want or when they have time and availability. They can do it where it's convenient for them. And so we have some students currently who maybe have circumstances beyond their control and they have to do, kind of an online, more flexible type of learning environment. And that's fantastic that technology can afford us that opportunity. It also allows us to deliver self-paced learning. That's also really important. And I think that when we talk about, supporting students with different levels of readiness and different needs, it just makes that learning a lot more accessible for them when it is more self-paced so that they don't feel like they're falling behind. I mean, they're getting support and they're moving through as is appropriate for them. I think that technology and a lot of our LMSs, they afford us data insights. So we can collect data on so many things, on student progress, on how often they're logging in, so their level of engagement. We can personalize learning based on their ability, based on their interest. There's just such efficient ways to, monitor student progress. And so I think that that's definitely an affordance of incorporating online learning in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, that will then lend itself to allowing teachers to differentiate based on students' needs. It increases accessibility because truly all you need is a device and an internet connection. And if we're going to incorporate online learning resources into our brick and mortar classroom, then we certainly have that built in already. And if we're going to ask students to do those things at home, well, we know they have a Chromebook and we know that the district technology services department is working with principals to support students who might need help with, internet connections at home. So I think the fact that, and we've known this for years and years, but delivering instruction in multiple modalities, so making sure that we're delivering things via video or audio. That's why I think sometimes screencasts are so phenomenal in terms of, recording direct instruction or facilitating some kind of review. It leads to increased outcomes for our students. And so that's really important. And it's definitely an affordance of incorporating blended learning environments into our, teaching and learning practices. We can also provide students with more opportunities for choice. I recently, in a class that I was teaching, we recently gave students, or we redesigned the course just this past semester so that students could kind of choose how they wanted to demonstrate their understanding at the end of each module, at the end of yeah, so do you wanna do it in a paper? Do you wanna do it in an infographic? Do you wanna create a video using Adobe Spark? So you can still have the same learning outcomes met in different ways. And when students have the opportunity to choose how they are going to demonstrate that and meet those learning outcomes, they really enjoy it. We've had really good feedback about that. And then also, I think, kind of like you were saying, it really does prepare our students for the future. When we think about what colleges require right now, more and more are doing, more online programs, and more students will be taking, future learning opportunities via an online format. And so I think that having blended learning environments as part of our, learning ecosystem on a regular basis, it only supports our students for any future endeavor that they want to do.
Well, and I think when you were talking about self or no, sorry, your data insights, sometimes I feel like we have our PLCs, our professional learning communities, and our data teams, and it's been like, how do we get together and talk about student progress, and how do we get together and talk about differentiation, and what tools or strategies should we use based on this data to improve students? Obviously they've got, they need some help in this area or whatever. And I think technology does afford us those things that we may have not known exactly how to get before. And I also love that, of course, you want to have different modalities like text, video, audio. I have one of the kindergarten teachers that I work with that she creates these amazing screencastifys in her lovely kindergarten teacher voice. And then she does the flipped model for her kinders, and the parents watch it with them, and help them out a lot, but as a parent, I like it when my daughter gets them, because then if we are stuck at something, we rewatch the video. So you get that opportunity to have some transfer practice or retrieval practice from, the students, because they're like, well, in the video, she was saying blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, there's a video. Let's rewatch that so that I can be a support for you. And I kind of like that a lot. I mean, it's not, there's not a lot of more guessing, like, what did the teacher tell you to do? Or what page of the book are we on? And so it's just kind of different. It's not different bad. It's different good in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, technology allows us to really have a broader reach, I think, with not like we get a lot more output for not as much input, if that makes any
Mhm.
sense. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think teachers, they struggle with that student teacher relationship component when they only have their kids online, and I totally get that. But I think it's, you just go back to your same best practices. How do you make relationships with kids when you're face to face? Well, you pull a couple kids aside, you talk to them about, what they're doing this weekend, or you talk to them about what they're watching. Hey, are you watching Vampire Diaries? No, I'm watching Bravo, like
Yeah.
you build those relationships, but you just do it virtually. You just do it through email, or maybe you pull a couple of them before, you have your Zoom or your WebEx or whatever your platform is, before the rest of the class comes in, and you kind of set those things up. So I think students are starting to see, even corporations, I think, are starting to see, I don't have to have people in cubes to do their jobs necessarily, like, I think that, and it's just going to be different. I think a lot of places are realizing, hey, I have my employees work from home, and they're being, if not, efficient, if not more efficient, because they don't have to travel to work. They're saving money that way. And I don't have to air condition a room of cubes, so I think our future is going to change because of this, for sure. And this is preparing our kiddos for that. What are some potential challenges, though, you see with this? Kind of, we're leveraging some technology a lot. What are some potential challenges?
Yeah, well, I mean, just like you were saying, even in terms of teacher student relationships, it is harder to develop those online. I mean, make no mistake, it's harder. It's not as easy. It's not as natural. You don't have the contact as often with your students. And when you're doing regular, WebEx sessions or Zoom sessions with your students, instead of seeing them face to face, it's just not as easy to see all of them at the same time or to have those quick, natural one-on-ones or, anything like that. But it
Well,
does.
especially if they have their screens off, and you're just talking to a bunch of black screens, I couldn't imagine. That's why I would have to figure out a way to call a couple in, or I don't know, have like mini conferences or like 5 minute conferences. Because at least if I saw a black screen with a name, I'd had talked to that kid a couple times face to face at least. And then you kind of know who you're teaching.
Well, and teachers aren't just learning how to use these resources. We're learning how to reinvent classroom management in an online environment. We're learning how to, develop relationships in an online environment. And that's hard. And so I definitely just want, teachers to, I want to recognize that on behalf of teachers, but it doesn't mean that it's not, possible. And so I think you're right, but it is one of the potential challenges. Even my husband is a high school PE teacher, and he said, he's in a different district, but he said that during their online schooling, when everybody was fully online, he had a few students who they just weren't motivated. They weren't really doing what they were supposed to be doing. And now that they're, back in class full time, he's like, these are some of my best students. So some students just don't respond well either to, a fully online education. And that's okay. They shouldn't necessarily be ready for that. But I do think that, there's always two sides of the coin. While there's so much potential in terms of the affordances that technology can provide, there are certainly challenges. I think relationship building is one of them, and we just have to navigate that and kind of, figure that out. But I think, like you said, trying to carve out opportunities for one-to-one student-teacher interactions whenever you can, do it.
Yeah.
So, using WebEx breakout rooms has been pretty cool, I
That's
think.
pretty
So,
cool. Yeah. That we
yeah,
finally got that. Yeah.
yeah, and so teachers can certainly learn how to use breakout rooms in order to maybe have conversations with smaller groups of students, or making sure that you carve out time on a daily or a weekly basis, however often you can, for office hours. If students need to drop in, they can, or maybe you just set up a little bit more conferencing opportunities with your students so that you are checking in with your kids. I also think that just training in and of itself, when you think about the dependencies of any technology, adoption, one of the biggest factors is PD and training. How are we going to ensure that everybody knows how to use these resources properly? Well, I mean, we didn't really have a lot of opportunity
We
to
didn't
do
have a lot of time to prep for that, but yes, okay, we're
that.
making
Yeah.
some steps.
And I will
Yep,
give my team, the ties, I'm going to give us kind of a little bit of credit right now in terms
you
of,
do it. You guys did fantastic job trying to
oh,
get
thank
that rolled out.
you. Well, I mean, because we just didn't have time. I mean, this just fell on everyone's laps, and so we really just wanted to make sure that we were offering some live training for teachers, but that we recorded them so that teachers can always go back and
I was in
review.
some of your trainings. I'm like, okay, I need to I need to learn about this tool, this or the platform or whatever. It was great, and I love that you can reference them as well.
Yeah, so I mean, those are all there on the Quick Clicks website. But if you think about it, I mean, talk about building the plane as you're flying it. We are literally training teachers on how to use WebEx by having them join us in a WebEx meeting, And so it was just kind of a little mind blowing at times. But, I think training needs to be something that is ongoing. And the ties are still continuing to offer different PDs. Right now we're doing a lot with computer science, because this week is computer science education week, which is exciting. But we will continue, especially as we are able to determine what our learning environments will look like as we head into second semester. We will certainly continue to offer training for all of our teachers in order to help them feel as prepared as possible in using these technologies.
Yeah, and leveraging them in a way that like you said, is effective to their design plan. Ultimately to make sure that their kids are moving forward. So we talked about a few different tech tools and enhancing teachers' overall learning design. However, there are two that I really have heard a lot about positively from teachers that are like, you know what, we've got Buzz and we've got Florida Virtual, and so we've got that down. But the two things that I feel like are changing people's lives, so I want you to dig into them for our listeners, are CAMI with a K and then EdPuzzle. So why should teachers embrace these two? And also, though, what do they need to watch out for? So, like, what are the benefits and challenges as they try to, if they are ready, if they're not, and they're like, Britt, we're not ready. This is the part of the podcast that you might just want to listen to and just kind of maybe introduce yourself to them. But there are teachers, I think, that now are on top of it, I feel like, and going into spring, they kind of want to add a few more to their toolbox. And the teachers I've talked to have said to me, "Oh man, CAMI, you can't live without CAMI, you can't live without EdPuzzle." So adding those to their learning design plans. I mean, what are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, I've heard so much good feedback about CAMI, and when we kind of spread the word about CAMI and made sure that it was available to all of our teachers, it was
Yeah,
kind of like just a huge moment for so many teachers, and we heard so much feedback that said like, "Oh my God, this is exactly what I needed." So
it was like a wave of positivity
yeah,
through our social media platforms that we have for professional growth and development. Like people are like, you need to be using CAMI. And I'm like,
that's
oh, we
awesome.
got to talk about CAMI on the podcast for spring for sure. So
That's awesome. Yeah, CAMI is an online document annotation and markup tool. So essentially, the great thing about CAMI is when we go digital, I think in a face-to-face classroom, we just take it for granted that we can give students a piece of paper and or a worksheet and they can mark it up, right? They can write whatever they need to on any kind of a piece of paper and turn it in, and it's just an easy, seamless productivity workflow. However, when we're in an online learning environment, we're a little bit more limited, and teachers didn't really know how to get students to complete an online worksheet or how they could even create an online worksheet to be completed by students, at home. So CAMI is an annotation tool where teachers can essentially share any kind of a document, including a PDF, especially a PDF, and students can then view it, they can annotate it, they can even collaborate on that document with other students using their Chromebook. Yeah, so it's just been really an invaluable tool to so many teachers during online learning. And, it remains a valuable tool for productivity and workflow in and out of the classroom. It can be used for online document collaboration, which makes it a great replacement for paper in, a digital environment. And I say benefits, it's very, very easy to upload and share files with your students. It promotes collaboration. It can allow you to have a paperless classroom. Challenges, honestly, I haven't had too many teachers share with me too many challenges, but certainly the free version, it could be limiting. I have, because there's a free version and there's a paid version. We have the free version. Everybody has access to that. It's one of the extensions that we all have access to. But I have not heard any teachers say that they felt limited by the free version. I mean, in the free version, you've got everything that you could need, which is, the highlighters, the pens, you got shape tools, you've got a text tool, you've got all sorts of things. Um, and I guess too, maybe a challenge could be that again, it's one of those things where you might need to train your students on how to use it. I think it's fairly user friendly, and all it would probably take is one kind of, I do, you do type of a little practice session, and you'll be,
right.
yeah,
Well, okay, so it's spelled KAMI, and you said is it a Chrome extension?
yes, it
So
is
they
a
need to
Chrome
go to the
extension.
Chrome web store, right?
Yes, they can get it
Okay.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm for other listeners that don't necessarily have Chromebooks or they're working with other different mobile devices, which could be different, right? But it's in the Chrome Web Store and it's CAMI, KAMI, and it really, honestly, I think really shifted the teacher's ability to kind of feel like they weren't just like, how do I get my kids to respond to this? I want them to highlight this and I want, these different colors. And it's been, it literally, I heard so much about it. I was like, we got to talk about this.
Yeah, and you can bring in documents from your Google Drive, from your
Right.
desktop, on your
Anywhere.
computer, and you can even start like a new blank page in CAMI as well. So it's really versatile. It's super user friendly, and it meets a need. And that's again kind of the bottom line when we think about choosing technologies to best fit our learning environment, whether we're face to face or online or somewhere in the middle in a blended learning model. I think that we have to think about, the tools that will meet our needs. And this was a need. A lot of teachers didn't know how to do this. They wanted to be able to do this. And so now we have a tool that meets that need, and it does so in a fairly user-friendly way. And so there you go. That's when the technology adds value to teaching and learning, I think.
Well, and it can add a lot of value to the flipped model. I mean, they could use CAMI at home to annotate a piece or work on something collaboratively with their group, and then when they come back into the classroom, now we're going to talk about it. The teacher's going to give an active learning experience. Okay, based on what you did with CAMI last night on this document, now let's do this XYZ. So I think it really is a good way to, again, make sure that the tech tool you're using is being effective, right, for your design plan.
Yeah.
Okay, just briefly, let's talk about EdPuzzle.
Yeah. So EdPuzzle is an online tool that allows you to create interactive video lessons for your students. So obviously, this is a great tool if you are wanting to try out flipped learning, because essentially what you can do is you can assign a video for students to watch, and you can pull a video from YouTube. That's usually what I do. So if it's a video that I, created, let's just say like maybe a screencast, I would create the screencast and then I would upload that to my YouTube channel and pull it into EdPuzzle that way through YouTube. And then what the great thing is, once you've grabbed a video in EdPuzzle, you can then embed questions throughout the video so that as students are watching it, maybe you want to insert like a little formative assessment question or a check for understanding about 5 minutes into the video. Maybe there was a really important concept or vocab word that was just brought up in the video. You can, stop the video right then and there, insert your question, and it can be like multiple choice, true, false, or open ended, I think. And then as students, so you set that all up on the teacher end, you include as many questions as you want. Then you send out the link to that video, to the interactive video to your students. Maybe you assign it through Buzz or Google Classroom, whatnot. That's how you share the link. When students watch the video, then wherever you embedded those questions, the video will automatically pause, the question will pop up, students will answer, and then once they've done that, you as the teacher can see the data. So how did students do? How did they answer? How many of them got it? Yeah. So when you think about it, as students are learning content, maybe for the first time at home because you're trying out the flipped learning model, you don't have to just guess like, oh, I got it, or
Right.
we're going to do this activity in class, to help them process the information. But if nobody really understood the information to begin with, that activity might be a little bit challenging. So if you have that video and you can kind of see ahead of time how students did, then you can say, okay, my students are ready for today's activity, or I don't think my students are ready for this activity. I think I'm going to have to provide a little additional direct instruction in the first 5 minutes of class. So it
Yep.
is a pretty cool tool.
It's a cool tool because then you can take some questions off of it too. So like, okay, you guys, I saw that we did really well on X part, but when we got to the end, it seemed like you guys missed that part. So can you ask me some questions? What questions do you guys have about the end of the video? That seemed to be challenging for you. And then I think that gives the students an opportunity to give you feedback, which is important as more important than you giving them feedback. They can give some feedback to you, and then you can just adjust a little bit at the activity that you had planned. And yeah, I mean, anytime you can get that instant data, that's like invaluable.
And sometimes too, teachers have told me they just want to, like, they're not sure if their students are actually watching the videos that they're assigning. Like, how can I make sure that my kids are actually watching the video? Well, do it as an EdPuzzle, and you can ensure that because the question, they won't be answering the questions if they're not actually watching and engaged in the video.
Right. Totally. Okay, so challenges with EdPuzzle.
Well, I think sometimes when you're first starting to use it and maybe you don't know exactly which video you want to use, it can be daunting to search for a video, right? So I would say just
Yeah.
be prepared and, know maybe what content you want to use. Which video is it? Did you already see something that you wanted to use, or do you want to make something that you want to use? Like I said, like your own screencast. Otherwise, it can be a little daunting. Also, I would say EdPuzzle allows you in the free account to store 20 videos. I could be wrong, but I think that. So, yeah, storage is always going to be limited in any, free resource, but that's
I think 20 is a lot. Like, you want to vary up your tools anyways, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah,
should
and
have
I think
enough.
it's again just that flexible mindset where like I don't need to save every video that I've ever assigned to my students for the entire 20 years that I've been teaching. Like, no, just keep it moving, 2-year videos, maybe semester by semester, and I think you should be fine.
Yeah, and I think what I really like about it is that you know you got it kind of right makes you chunk your content. Like you can think about, okay, sometimes when you're lecturing or and I hate the word lecture, but I mean, that's, part of learning is, I hate that it got a bad rap is what I'm saying. I don't hate the word lecture, but I hate that lecturing got a bad rap as just standing up and delivering. Because I think sometimes we forget, that our students can only listen as long as their age in minutes. And so if they're, 10, you maybe can do like a 20-minute video and then like maybe 7 minutes in, ask them a question. 6 minutes in, ask them a question. Then maybe ask them a final one. And that's pretty much all they're going to be able to kind of get. But at least it's kind of chunked in a way. It kind of makes you chunk your lessons in a way for students to be able to comprehend them, I think, a little bit better. And I like that about EdPuzzle. It kind of forces you to do some chunking of your own material.
Yeah, it'll help to increase engagement that same way too, because you're allowing your students to kind of process the information chunk by chunk. So yeah.
Yeah, they can pause, think, like, okay, let me think about this. It's not, and I always like tell teachers, it's like not gotcha, for your students. Like you don't want to be like writing like the toughest question. Like it's not like a, aha, are you paying attention? Try not to think of it that way. It's more of a let's pause and let them process in their information that they just learned so that they can move on into the next portion.
Yeah, and questions don't have to be right or wrong answer. Questions can and should be more on reflection, right? Or
Right.
connection and how might you apply
Metacognition.
this? Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't have to be, what did they just say? Or, it doesn't have to be a right or wrong answer.
And I think right or wrong answers sometimes are so surface level. I'd rather have them do some metacognition or make a question that really is like maybe, okay, now apply this to a real world situation or, and I think the students will also appreciate that too. I mean, it will be a little less like I'm taking a test while I'm watching a video. It's more like I'm interacting with the video.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, Stacey, it was lovely talking to you always, as always. I mean, I just wish we could hang out and had more time to hang out and
Oh,
watch our binge watching shows. But if listeners want to know and learn more from you, where can they find you online?
well, I would say just email me. Email's the best way to get a hold of me, and then we can connect either via WebEx or in person. Or if you're not in our district, I can always, see you somewhere somehow. But my email is stacy.pasquale@gilbertschools.net. I do have my WebEx personal room. If you're in Gilbert, you should hopefully know that. But yeah, I would love to connect with you. Anytime the ties are always willing and wanting to connect with teachers at all of the schools. We want to support you in using technology to redesign your learning environments. That's kind of our mission. That's our purpose. And we would love to connect with everyone to do that.
Well, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you for being on today, but I appreciate our ties and you guys working so hard to make sure that our teachers have what they need in these uncertain times. And yeah, I think you guys are doing a fabulous job. So thanks so much for coming on today and just talking about how do we leverage tech and make sure it fits with our instructional design plans.
Well, thank you. It's always a pleasure. I'm always honored when you ask me to come on, and I love chatting.
Oh, I love it. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Learning Unlocked and finding out more about flipped classroom, the blended classroom, CAMI, EdPuzzle, and just leveraging all kinds of different ways to use technology or technology tools in your design plan for student success. If you have listened today as a GPS educator, you can receive PD recertification credit by visiting our Employee Hub page and navigating to professional growth and then digital PD courses. Just a reminder that we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at GPS Prof Growth. That's at GPS PROF GROWTH. For more information or resources from this episode, please visit our website at learningunlocked.libsyn.com/website. We are also distributed by Libsyn to Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Audible. Episodes are also available on our PGD YouTube channel under playlists. Our intro and outro music are licensed from Melody Loops. Thanks again, key holders. Keep unlocking that curiosity, creativity, and innovation with your students. Stay kind and courageous, and I'll see you next time.